Alright, man, peace. You know, brothers, one of the favorite archetypal roles that the modern woman loves to portray and live out is that of the victim. Why is that? Because self-victimization allows the woman to promote the energies that she needs to maintain her narcissistic overall core, that being the attention-mongering dynamic within the woman. And the victimization mentality always allows her to be the center of attention and to blame others. Why am I bringing this up? Because due to the fact that particularly in the so-called black community, we're living under, at least the vast majority of the so-called black community are living under what I call a black matriarchy, and many others call it a matriarchy as well. The woman is allowed to establish the tenor of what goes on in the household, and many of her characteristics are passed down unto her children, both male and female. And that is a trickle-down effect dating back all the way to slavery, when the slave woman would tell her son to not swell up against the so-called white man, especially adult so-called white men, so that he would not be viewed as a threat. Even to the point where almost by osmosis, the young black boy understood that if he was intelligent, he had to hide it. And that also has a trickle-down effect down to this day, because within the so-called black community, we do not extol ourselves for our mental capacity or our cognitive function. We extol ourselves for our ability to perform in athletics. And that's one of the main reasons why we have so many issues solving problems. Because we do not train our sons to be three-dimensional thinkers. We just train them to lead with their emotions. That's a trickle-down effect going all the way back to slavery. The slave boy was taught by his mother, do not show that you can read, do not show that you can discern and decipher, only show that you can be a good servant, so that hopefully the master will feel sorry for you. He will not view you as a threat. The same thing with the so-called black woman from slavery all the way to today. She wants to maintain that victimization mentality, not only in her dealings with the Caucasian and other races, but also in her interactions with the so-called black man. Of course, not all black women, but the vast majority of them. And once again, that trickles down to her son. And we see it manifest itself in a myriad of ways. Once again, the so-called black man in general has an issue being a three-dimensional thinker because he leads with his emotions. That means that the cycles are going to continue. We're not going to be able to avert many of the situations and the phenomena that occur that we all know about, even as they're manifesting right before our eyes. Our mentality is, okay, I was born in this hood, I was raised in this hood, that's just how things are going to be. I'm going to have children, bring them into the same environment, they're going to be imbued with the same psychological issues, and the cycle is going to continue. We're going to keep sending our children to these same schools that are once again imbuing them with the slave narrative and the slave mentality, and that's how you have issues that never are resolved. And we're also seeing many of these conditions within professional athletes. They're trying to emote as opposed to discern and decipher. One of many being Mr. Antonio Brown, who, as we can see, to me, he has extreme psychological issues. And I'm starting to wonder if he's a monarch athlete going through self-destruct programming, which normally occurs around the age of 30 or 31. I've already done a video about Antonio Brown showing himself as an adherent to the concept of the Baphomet, or the worship of the quote-unquote Kemetic goat god, or the Babylonian Kemetic goat god per se, who is the god of many of the more prominent members of the entertainment sphere, the sports world, the political sphere, singers and actors in Hollywood, etc. So in my view, he clearly is a member of the craft. Is he someone who's bipolar or suffering from multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder? Who knows? But he sure is showing the signs of someone who is definitely going through some type of psychological or spiritual travail. So anyway, Jason Whitlock and his crew here on the panel have decided that they're going to discuss the hot button topic of the victimization mentality amongst black male athletes, which is really an issue within the entire so-called black community amongst the men. So of course they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
All right, welcome back to Speak for Yourself. Jason Whitlock, Marcellus Wiley, joined again by LeVar Arrington and TJ Houshmandzadeh. Let's get to the most fearless discussion of the day. A day after accusing the NFL of unfairness and racism and claiming he no longer wants to play professional football.
That's another issue that the overly emotional, self-victimized so-called black man has. He loves to play the quote-unquote race card, which is a major problem because what it does is it dilutes actual, real racial issues that are pervasive within the so-called black community. Whenever you have people who are intellectually inept, like an Antonio Brown, trying to speak on issues that are way above his pay grade, like racial dynamics, all that does is dilute actual real points that can be made that might be able to initiate change while we're still in this captivity. That's why I've always stated most athletes are not qualified to be leaders. And that's why I've stated that when Stephen A. Smith tried to call to arms many of the more prominent athletes in the sports world, it made no sense whatsoever. Just because you can dribble a basketball or catch a football does not mean that you should be speaking about race. And let me also say this, because I'm surprised that no one else has really picked up on this, especially someone like a Jason Whitlock, who normally has a greater deal of perspicacity when it comes to, some three-dimensional thought processes. Most of these top football players who seem to be coming under fire, especially the black ones, appeared on LeBron James's show, The Shop. There seems to be a The Shop curse, whether it's Todd Gurley, Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham, Michael Bennett. All of these guys have been besought with problems ever since they appeared on that show. Now, we know Antonio Brown had issues before he went on The Shop, but they've only gotten worse. They've escalated, because the worst thing that can happen to a self-victimizing so-called liberal black man is to be around other self-victimizers. That encourages you to embrace your inner victim, which means you're never going to solve your problems. You're only going to make them worse. Ever since Antonio Brown appeared on LeBron James' show, The Shop, and LeBron is one of the top actors in the sports world. His job is to sit there at the head of that coven, at the head of that circle, and act as if he understands the plight of all of these highly paid athletes in the sports world, whether it be football, basketball, baseball, boxing, or what have you. He's trying to act as if he's thinking on your level. LeBron is all about his money. So any athlete who takes LeBron James seriously, you deserve what you get. Ever since Todd Gurley appeared on that show, The Shop, and he agreed with LeBron and many of the other members of that cipher that the NFL owners were racist, you notice how a lot of his playing time has been cut off. It has certainly been diminished ever since, I believe, the owner of the Rams, name is Stan Kroenke, must have saw that interview and justifiably so got upset. How you gonna call me racist when I'm paying you 8 figures a year, dude? So you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna fuck up your stats. There's no way in the world that you're going to tell me that Todd Gurley's knee is that bad that he can barely get playing time, but it just goes to show you how much of a corporate machine the NFL and the NBA are, for that matter. Because if you piss off the wrong people, they will run you out of those leagues.
Unemployed diva wide receiver Antonio Brown backtracked, tweeting, "I'm just very frustrated right now with the false allegations and slander to my name. I love football and I miss it. I just want to play, and I'm very emotional about that."
Well, that's the problem. Brothers, we're all human beings. We all have emotions. We're all going to go through things in life, whether it be self-caused issues or issues that were caused by other people that affect us. We're going to have emotions about those things. And sometimes we might state things that we don't mean, but we cannot consistently do that, or we become emotional. You are what you repeatedly do. If you repeatedly allow your emotions to take control of how you express yourself, you are an emotional person. And no matter what anybody tells you, it is not good for you to be emotional as a man. As a man, you're supposed to be the linchpin of your household and of your environment. You're supposed to be the hub. You're supposed to be the form of steadiness within your environment. And no matter what a woman tells you about how it's okay to express yourself and it's okay to cry, and I'll probably be delving into this concept more in other videos, women will not respect you if you cannot control your emotions. I don't give a shit what they tell you.
"I'm determined to make my way back to the NFL ASAP." I'm not surprised Brown is emotional, and I'm sure some people believe his expression of that emotion is justified and healthy. I'm not one of those people.
I agree with you, sir. But being overly emotional is a part of the care package known as being woke. When you're woke, you can say whatever you want, no matter how irresponsible it is to others or to yourself. And then you could just say, well, I'm emotional about this issue, and everyone's supposed to be empathetic. Empathy is a good trait to have, but there's a thin line between being empathetic and being an enabler. Sometimes you have to assist people in becoming a better version of themselves.
I believe Brown fits a pattern of male athletes who are increasingly ruled and controlled by their emotions.
I agree, sir.
He's no different from Baker Mayfield and Odell Beckham Jr. It's my belief that the societal attack on masculinity, coupled with the enormous wealth now attained by professional athletes, has significantly changed the attitude, behavior, and identity of the modern athlete.
Well, I agree with you more on the first point. There definitely is a concerted attempt to attack masculinity. They call you toxically masculine whenever you're able to maintain any sense of decorum and control. They don't like that. They want you to descend to the level of a woman. And the funny thing is that as soon as a man starts to become overly emotional, you know who's going to levy attacks against you the most? Women. Women are going to tell you, why don't you be more of a man and keep your shit together? Because deep down, women understand that men are above them, no matter what they say. That's why you have to spend far less time paying attention to what women say when you truly understand that most of what comes out of a woman's mouth, she doesn't really mean or understand.
In the name of progress, men and male athletes are being emasculated. I also believe the emasculation is most acute among black male athletes because the black father is absent in many homes.
Absolutely, sir. But you know what that also means? That means that the emasculation of the black male athlete is not a real issue. It's more the emasculation of the black boy. It starts from his youth, from his mother, and that entire toxic environment that he's quote unquote raised in. Now, of course, this is a sports show, so Whitlock has to take the sporting angle.
Baby mama culture has produced a culture where the highest level of blackness is victimhood. That's why LeBron James claims spray paint he never saw made him feel like Emmett Till's mother.
I'm still waiting for an update to that story. Someone please tell me how you're LeBron James. You live in a high-end Los Angeles neighborhood known as Brentwood, and someone comes and sprays the word nigger on your front gate, and there's no camera footage of it, and he still to this day has not been caught. How is that something that is of substance unless it is what it actually is? That being a hoax to try to amplify LeBron James through the woke paradigm. And I told you, brothers, they've been doing this for the last 2 or 3 years with this dude, LeBron James. He's an actor.
That's why Colin Kaepernick chose martyrdom over playing football.
And I'll be covering the latest Kaepernick developments in another video. I've already done a video pertaining to Jay-Z and Colin Kaepernick and what Jay-Z's true role is. Please understand that the reason why all of a sudden Kaepernick is getting these meetings with NFL bosses or NFL GMs or what have you to supposedly try out for a position in the league is at the behest of Jay-Z behind the scenes. I've told you that he plays the proverbial 007. They both have the same end game. The only difference is that Jay-Z's playing the good cop, Colin Kaepernick plays the bad cop, and they're going to meet in the middle. The goal is to promote cultural Marxism in the professional sports world. They're trying to re-engineer the NFL so that they can push feminism, the homosexual movement, transgenderism, etc. That's what's known as cultural Marxism.
Why every weekend Odell Wine's NFL rules mistreated him. That's why we act like Bill Polian suggested that Lamar Jackson play receiver is akin to banishment to the CFL.
Well, I'll say this about the entire Lamar Jackson issue, or the conversation involving him and Bill Polian. That conversation is a bit more nuanced than just being a portion of the victim mentality dynamic. And I have to give Lamar a lot of credit because he's handled himself in a very adroit manner. He's been very skillful in how he's been able to step around a lot of the nonsense involving the quote-unquote mobile black quarterback. Very mature. But that conversation is a bit more nuanced than just pertaining to the victim mentality issue.
We're on a constant hunt for victim status as a sign of our blackness. The mentality contradicts the culture of sports.
Well, Whitlock, the real issue is that these athletes have to promote victimhood because they're trying to guilt trip the so-called white man. That's why I state that pro-blacks are actually pro-white. They really just want a hug. They cannot be validated according to their own merits. They have to blame everything on the white man because they're hoping that they can get him to admit and acknowledge that he owes them a hug and that he owes them acceptance.
It's unhealthy and undermines the success of any athlete who buys into it. All right, guys, I'm dropping a grenade on us.
Is that a grenade?
Yes, it is. That's a bomb. Has emasculated victim mentality hurt black male athletes?
No. What we're seeing is an enlightenment.
Now listen to what Marcellus Wiley led off his soliloquy with. He said that victimization or the victim mentality amongst black male athletes is not hurting them. He says what we're seeing is an enlightenment. In other words, he's a new age thinker. That's why I state that a lot of the quote-unquote intelligentsia amongst the so-called black community, they're actually just following behind the dictates of the liberal Caucasians. When you hear terms like enlightenment, we have to harken back to the Enlightenment thinkers of the mid to late 1700s. Many of them were so-called black Europeans who were taught today were Caucasian Europeans. But just to get back to the point, the role of Enlightenment thinkers or Illuminists was to get you to embrace reason over the spiritual aspect or your relationship with the Most High in the spirit of truth, not according to the worship of yourself. What Enlightenment thinkers taught you to do was worship yourself as your own God. And many of the people today, they love to use terms like evolution or enlightenment because those terms, the connotation behind those terms is that it's a change that is an improvement. So you have to be very careful. There's a difference between the term change and evolution. The connotation of the term evolution is that it's a change that is an improvement over what came previous. And that is not the case. For a man to just fully embrace being an emotional person, that's not an improvement. But I will say this. We have to be able to express ourselves in a constructive manner. You just can't hold everything in. But you also just can't emote like a Tasmanian devil. Because back in the 50s and the 60s, a lot of brothers were being heavily oppressed and they didn't understand how to express themselves constructively. They end up going home and taking it out on their wife and kids, beating the hell out of them. So that's equally as bad, if not worse.
And what we're seeing is evolution. What we're seeing.
You see that, brothers? Enlightenment, evolution. Those are terms that New Age Negroes use to try to blackanize a lot of concepts that are taught to them by Caucasian liberals.
It's a culture that is now enticing, encouraging people to really dig into different realms of expression that before we were told to suppress. So, as we know, the same things that warm you can be the same things that burn you. Let's talk about our people. Let's talk about our brothers. And I know I'm a walking example of someone who has post-traumatic stress demons.
So you know what that means, brother? No disrespect. We have to take everything that you say with a grain of salt, because you're not speaking from the perspective of someone who is objective. You're speaking from the perspective of someone who may have had many of the same issues as Antonio Brown. So no matter how erudite you might sound, you're someone who's been compromised by your life condition.
And what I've learned through my ride of 44 years on this planet is what worked then doesn't necessarily need to work now. And more importantly, probably won't work. Now,
well, it depends. It depends on your perspective. It depends on the context.
It's through therapy as I go every single week.
He goes to therapy every single week. Once again, no disrespect to the brother, but if you have to go to therapy every single week, that means that you have a lot of deep-seated issues, not only going back to your childhood, but most likely you're having trouble dealing with the pressures of your current life. I'm already on record as saying that this brother, he admitted that he's been engaged 4 times. He's currently married, I believe. He has children, of course, and that's a beautiful thing. As long as his relationship with his woman is positive, that's great for them. But when it comes to these modern day dudes, you never know what's positive for them. Positive for them might be finding a new mommy figure. And when I hear a man say that he's been engaged 4 times, that tells me that he was looking for another mother to preside over him in some way, shape, or form.
And you're fine. Like your normalcy is your comfort. And as men, we've been told that if you keep it in here and you act this certain way, you'll be fine. Well, let's all register our secret, private lowlights.
Brother, let me say this because he's making a valid point. But let me say this very quickly. When we're all going through things in life, as we all will, because we're all human beings, we're all on a planet that we cannot control what's going to happen next, at least to a degree. That's why we have to be 3-dimensional thinkers. We have to take into account the repercussions, not only of our actions, but also of our thoughts. Because our actions are the direct after effect of our thoughts. And our condition is the direct after effect of our actions, for the most part. Of course, there's a percentage of things that are going to transpire that we cannot control. But a lot of shit that the so-called black man goes through today can be controlled. And that's why I state things like brothers should not have children unless and until they're financially capable. Because when you bring your child into a world where you're not financially capable of presiding over their uprearing, they're going to end up in the same condition as you. We're supposed to be trying to get better every generation. Why would you want to bring a child into the same corrosive, toxic environment that you were raised in? That means that you don't love your child enough. A lot of people might not like that, but it is what it is. That's part of the problem. You can't have 3 or 4 kids in a bad environment and then look at the TV and say, the white man is the reason why my kids can barely eat and why they're learning garbage in school. No, you're part of the reason.
those implosions, those triggers, those things that keep us at the edge. And what this culture has realized is, let's get these brothers farther from that edge. Because if not, then the little things will become big things and blown out of proportion. And
all valid points.
Not to be athletes. I'm just talking about the common man walking around who gets triggered to a different place because he's already in an inner turmoil because he has no expression. So I'm encouraged about this. As anything, when it's new, there's an overcorrection. So we're going to see people kind of go too far before they realize what's the true bullseye.
Right, but here's the issue with that. You can make that statement, but you're presuming a lot. You're presuming that Antonio Brown either, number one, has the intellect to self-correct, or number two, is willing to have people around him who can assist him in self-correction. Sometimes, just because you have power does not mean that you deserve to have it. There's a lot of presumption there once again. That's why before we get behind the wheel of a car, we have to earn the right to get behind the wheel of that car. It's what's known as a license. You can't have a 5-year-old child behind the wheel of a car and say, okay, just let them drive. Eventually they'll get it right. No, it doesn't work like that.
I told you before, any marksman, when he wants to hit a bullseye, he doesn't aim at the bullseye. He aims off. Then pull.
Well, it depends on what he's shooting at. Is it a moving target or is it a still target? If it's a still target, then you have to factor in wind. And many times they tell you aim small, miss small. So, we can use that analogy, and that's a decent analogy. But for some people who might not have the cognitive function or the mental capacity, you might think you're shooting at a moving target. For someone who's been raised to think responsibly, you grasp that the target is really not moving. It's your brain that's moving. Once you still and calm your mind, it's much easier to get your goals accomplished.
This culture right now is off. It's off. You're sensitive. You're too emotional. You're complaining. Boom. Then they'll finally nail it. We have to wait for that.
We can't always wait. That means that you're hoping and you're putting faith in people who may not have been raised properly, that they're going to figure things out. And that's not how society works.
Oh, man.
Great response. Go ahead.
It's interesting. This has been an age-old deal for me. Growing up, I was the son of a school teacher, and she taught in Northview Heights. And if you're from Pittsburgh, you know that Northview Heights is one of the toughest areas that you could ever be in. We used to have to go into the communities to do parent-teacher conference. And it was interesting because I learned at an early age that, having a dad and having the situation that I had, that there was a lot of elements out there that existed. And as it applies to this situation, there's just a lot of, and within my community, within the black community, there isn't that education, there isn't that constant reassurance of what you represent, the power that you represent.
Absolutely. And that's the point of a father. The father is meant to act as a paradigm for the young son to copy. He's also meant to act as a paradigm for the daughter to look to and say, this is the type of man that I want to live in a home with. That's why the father passes ownership of his daughter over to the husband. So it's pivotal, man. That's why I have that series, Black Man Protect Your Seed, because we are the be-all, end-all. And that's why in this Luciferian society, they tell you black girls rock, black girl magic. They want you to continue to believe that the so-called black woman is supposed to be the head and that she's some magical, mystical mother goddess figure so that you can keep putting your hope and faith in her. And the woman is not a problem solver. She's a problem causer. It's just fact. Many people are not going to like that. It's okay. They are agents of chaos by nature, and they have to be moderated by men who are in their right mind. Once again, that is why they're promoting the paradigm or the archetype household of the mother goddess ruling or running her. The woman has to be in control over the children at all times so that they can have that overly sensitive, overly emotional aspect embedded within them, and thereafter they can be manipulated very easily by the television, by social media, etc.
And it always bothered me, and just seeing how it's interesting. You feel so let down for so long. Everything is, you're being let down. I can't trust, and it's for so many different years. And I don't know if it's emasculated victim, but it certainly is victim. You feel like a victim. You feel like nothing can go your way. And then for
Well, my issue with Antonio Brown is that he'd be the wrong person to promote that, because he must have felt some type of self-assurance within himself that he could transcend a lot of the issues in his life, because at the end of the day, he fought to become, at least by most, considered the best wide receiver in the NFL. So why get to the pinnacle and all of a sudden everybody's out to get you? That makes no sense. It would make more sense for Raheem from the hood or Tayshawn from round the way to say that everybody has out against me. I have this resume. I'm trying to get a job. Nobody wants to hire me. My father left me. I never knew him. At least when he plays the violin, it makes more sense. Antonio Brown, that makes no sense whatsoever. That's why I state that he's been triggered by social media, and that appearance on the shop, we have to start to scrutinize that appearance more, because all these football players going on LeBron James' show, they just lose their fucking mind. They're trying to be woke like NBA players, and they can't.
These years, you take that pain and you take that letdown and you take all of those elements and you use it to propel you as an athlete. You go to a certain level, you get to a certain place, and it's always your mom that's there. It's your grandmom that was there, your aunt, your caretaker that was there for you for all those years. And I think what we're figuring out now, what we're seeing, and why for me, and even the segment we're talking about Dion being a coach, why it would be important to have strong male figures, especially strong black male figures in sports, is because the more success, I wrote this down, the more success an athlete has, the further they move away from the people that can relate and understand them.
That's very true. But let me also touch on a sentiment that he broached about having strong black male figures in the sports world. You know who you have to convince that of the most? Not the so-called white man. You have to convince so-called young black men of that. Because as of right now, they're just sitting back chilling, collecting their big paychecks. Every time you turn around, Adam Silver says he wants to have female coaches. He wants to have more female referees. Well, the so-called black man basically has made the NBA a global multi-billion-dollar business enterprise. How come we don't have more black male referees? How come we don't have more black male coaches? How come we don't have more black male GMs? How come we don't have another black male owner other than Michael Jordan? These are questions that the so-called black man should be asking, but he's constantly getting appeased by the super liberal Caucasian Jewish commissioner by the name of Adam Silver. So what he's basically doing is giving them candy and making them think that that's a healthy meal, and it's not.
All right, so the more success that person has, they found all this success, they had all these good things happening to them on the football field. And you mentioned LeBron, it happened on the basketball court. And then all of a sudden, here comes Nike. Here comes the NFL, here comes the NBA, here comes the agents, here comes all of the money. And now all of a sudden we're looking at the fact that somebody who had used the pain to push them and propel them, now in these type of circumstances that AB has found himself in, now turns him into a victim. The same thing that made him a hero, the same thing that put him in a position to make the money that he makes, and to have an agent, and to have a beautiful house and a nice car, and everything that comes along with the success. The one thing that has continued to be a disconnect and a divide is the development of them as human beings.
They never had a chance to develop as a human being, because he's never been subjected to an environment where he was forced to preside over others. Responsibility brings out the best in you, because now you actually have to think about something or someone other than yourself. That's why, not to digress, when I speak about Kyrie Irving, I always state that Kyrie Irving many times causes his own problems, because when you're the most talented, that means that you've been given your number one superpower, that being not what you could do for yourself, but how you can empower others. And when he learns that, he'll become a superstar player. Right now, he's just a superstar talent. Many other players in the NBA and the NFL had to learn that. When it comes to Antonio Brown, I'm not quite sure if he's ever truly been held accountable for his actions until now. And that's why he's lashing out like a child.
I think that that's the biggest problem that we're seeing right here. And when you look at the emasculated victim mentality, yes, it hurts us as a people. It hurts black people, because in the end, if you don't understand that value, and if you're not trained in order to be able to handle what comes along with that success, it's not just the success of being able to run around and catch the ball. It's being able to be a person, a positive person.
Now that's only going to be changed when the so-called black man decides that he's not going to tolerate dumb shit anymore. That's why I always state the crosshairs are on the so-called black man. We're the ones who are going to have to change these issues. And our main opponent, of course, after ourselves, is not going to be the so-called Caucasian man and woman. It's going to be the so-called black woman. I'm not quite sure if brothers truly grasp how much they've been programmed to believe that a lot of dynamics in this society that are actually made to keep us under control, the so-called black man thinks are there for his benefit. They love talking about mama and grandma and auntie and so on and so forth, and the Nubian queens and all this nonsense. Wait until they find out that you actually want the throne, black man. That's when you're going to see how they really feel about you. Because the so-called black woman views you as her competition. She views you as her helpmeet, not the other way around, no matter what they say.
In relation to AB, I know he grew up in Liberty City in Miami, and I don't know how involved his dad was in his life, but I've never met my dad. And when you grow up in the projects, and victim mentality is basically, I blame everybody for my problems. It's never my fault. It's always somebody else's fault.
Absolutely. And that's a trickle-down effect from the mother mentality. I'm not trying to demonize the mindset of the woman. The woman is a survivor by nature. So the first thing that she's going to try to do is see how she can meld herself into her environment. She's going to try to make sure that she's as non-threatening as possible to those with power and to those who are going to subsidize her lifestyle. And she's going to teach that same mentality to her children.
When you fight fire with fire. And so he's looking at the NFL like, oh, y'all not going to reinstate me? You're not going to let me play football? All right, I'm going to send this tweet out. F the NFL, I don't want to play. He takes a step back. I really do want to play.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put this out there.
Much like the woman will often say things that are the opposite of what she really means. You have many females out here who are single because they were dating a man who they were trying to control or manipulate, a good man. And they sent out a text message or some type of message or missive of some sort, email or what have you, trying to communicate with that man in a way that they thought was going to break the man down into something more favorable for them. And the man said, you know what, bitch, bump that, fuck you, I'm out. And still to this day, she wishes that she had not done that, because the overall content of the message or what she was trying to convey to the man was the opposite of what she really wanted. She really just wanted to be closer to that man, but she's been trained by those around her to always try to control a man. Many of these young males today, they do the same thing. They try to lash out when in reality they just want support, but they don't know how to accept or receive support because they're scared they're going to get betrayed. And a lot of these trust issues come from not having a father in the home who's going to preside over them and many times tell them what they need to hear as opposed to what they want to hear.
In relation to his accuser, it's more so, I've worked my tail off to get this money. I'm not about to be your come up. Like, you're not about to come up off of me. And that's how we think. You grow up, and how I grew up and where I come from, and I'm sure it's very similar situations. You shown a sign of weakness, you will get picked on every single day.
Absolutely.
And so you have to have his mentality growing up, because you can't survive in that environment. You will get bullied and picked on every day. And so when you come at me, 100% I'm coming back at you. I'm not going to show you a sign of weakness at all, because if I do, that will be attacked. And we all know that. And so he probably didn't have a male figure to tell him, it's okay to show signs of weakness, but you ain't going to be no punk.
Absolutely. And, you just have to know who to be vulnerable with. In other words, you have to know who's actually in your life for your best interest. And the vast majority of people that you encounter in your life are not really there for your best interest. They are there for their own. And that's why so many cats have these levels of distrust, because that person that you're supposed to be able to confide in wasn't there. So you're trying to build bridges with people that you think are friends in junior high school and high school, and they're betraying you. You're trying to relate to them in some way, discussing personal problems in your life, and as soon as they turn against you, they're going to try to disperse your personal information to everyone they can to try to harm you the harshest way they can. And that's going to cause scars in the consciousness of people. So once again, it all goes back to the so-called black man and making sure that we inseminate the right woman and we preside over the household. There can be no other solutions until that's in effect. And once again, when and if the so-called black man starts to implement that, you're going to find that many of the people that you thought were your allies are going to show their true spirit. I always liken the liberal black woman to the character that Sharon Stone played in the film Total Recall, where Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was under mind control. He thought that woman, Sharon Stone, was his loving wife, and she was actually his handler. Her job was to watch over him and make sure that he did not step out of bounds from what he was supposed to be doing.
So that's the biggest problem, is in our culture, in the way a lot of us have grown up, you show that it's the beginning of the end. And so he has to learn it's okay to admit, I played a part in this. And let me see if I can correct this and try to rectify the situation. And once he does that, he will begin to move forward.
Well, the main issue with what you're saying, TJ, and I agree with it, but the main issue is that he's stuck down that woke rabbit hole. Once again, he got together with LeBron and all these other guys and these people that tell him that you're never wrong. It's the white man trying to keep his foot on your neck. And I'm sorry, I have a hard time taking athletes who are making 8 figures a year seriously when there are actual real racial issues that are problematic within the so-called black community, real forms of oppression. And these guys are trying to act as if they're confederate with that, and you're not. There are certain ways that you can think yourself out of bad situations. I'm not saying that so-called black athletes are treated equally in the NFL or the NBA to how a Caucasian athlete might be treated if he were on the same level as them. We'll get a chance to see that over the next few years with Luka Doncic. We'll see if he gets favorable treatment over black athletes. But either way, you're both making 8 figures a year. So how much are you really struggling? The main issue with Antonio Brown is that he thinks he could do whatever he wants to do. And he thinks that nothing is sacred. And in the process of being shown that, yes, there are sacred things that you're going to have to adhere to, if he has to be traumatized, he has to be traumatized.
I think everybody said some interesting things. The one thing where I'm critical of our culture, and where I don't think this is being framed as progress. Show your emotions. Let your emotions go. I think we need to be trained how to handle, deal with, properly express our emotion.
Absolutely.
And that's what's been missing with a lot of these athletes that had no male role model, no father in their life. And I see it like, let me just be emotional. And emotions is what gets me through a football game or through an athletic event, and it's going to serve me here showing my emotions. No. Properly channeling, properly dealing with your emotions, that will get you through this in a healthier fashion. And I'm just, for me as a man, I just look at a lot of where we're heading. It's just not masculine. It's just not the way I was brought up.
Well, here's the issue, Whitlock. Masculinity has been outlawed in the Western world. And I'm sure that you understand that by now. But in modern America and in quote-unquote civilized Europe, they're in the process of outlawing masculinity. They even have a new term for men. They call it being quote-unquote cisgendered. In other words, if you were born anatomically a man and you have the spirit of a man, they call you quote-unquote cisgendered. Why is that? And that's a psychiatric term. Why have they decided to coin a phrase for a regular man? It's because they're trying to tell you that you're no higher than a transgendered person. In other words, someone who believes that they were born anatomically a certain gender, but their spirit is that of the opposite gender. They want you to think that there's no difference between the two. So in that way, covertly, they're trying to tell you that masculinity is no more. So it's up to men to stand up for that. But men don't stand up for anything. We just sit back and murmur and make comments on social media or on comment boards or what have you. We don't stand up and tell these people, no, you're not going to tell me what I am. Go fuck yourself. And let them understand that there's going to be a problem if you keep trying to push and promote these things.
It's by my father. And I think that's the key.
Your father. And so until this is a bigger problem, until our fathers are in the picture, who do we learn this from?
Agreed.
That's why I think
who do you learn it from?
I think having the right figures coaching and being a part of their lives at that formidable stage is so important.
Also, what's extremely important is that, once again, And the so-called black man, you could pussyfoot around this all you want. Of course, TJ Houshmandzadeh, he spoke about the main thing. But right underneath that, if number one is that the so-called black man has to preside over his home, 1A is that black woman's going to have to be moderated, man. She's going to have to be put under subjection. A lot of people not going to like that. But they're going to have to relearn their role and stick to their role. And that's being a wife and a mother. Those are your main purposes. Your main purpose is not to be some independent woman who runs the streets and does whatever you want and spreads your legs for every time. Dick, and Harry.
What you're talking about, we are taking our scars into a business environment. We're taking our personal scars and our personal experiences into a business environment.
Agreed. And that's not just in professional sports, it's also in the corporate world. Our people have a lot of scars that stop them from being as proficient as they could be in a corporate office space. A lot of so-called black people are trying to play out these race war type of scenarios in the corporate office space. That's why I tell cats, corporate America is not for the so-called black man. I'm not saying that you shouldn't work there. You got to do what you have to do to pay your bills. But at the end of the day, you should be trying to build up to having your own thing. That's the main way that we're going to be able to recalibrate ourselves into a ruling class mentality. Have your own thing. Start your own business. Whatever you love to do. Build towards that. If you have to sit in a cubicle for 5 or 6 more years, you should be still building towards something that is your own.
I still think, though, and again, this is going to be a bomb, but I just think we're shirking our responsibilities as men. See, because, again, we've turned being a man into complaining. As a man, the way I was raised and the way I feel every day, my job is to fix problems.
Absolutely. It's called solving. It's called being a 3-dimensional thinker and being solution-oriented. But once again, that's something that's passed from father to son. And even women who have traits of that normally were raised up under a strong patriarchal environment. So we have to address the fact that they're constantly trying to attack the quote-unquote patriarchy, the same system that has built everything around us. For some reason, women seem to think that they're builders, and they're not. Women are not constructors, they're destructors. It just is what it is. You look at these various mother goddess figures. Kali is the goddess of destruction, right? AKA Kali Ma, or whatever you want to call her. She's the goddess of destruction. Men are builders. So we have to start attacking the energies that are attacking us, put them in their place so that we can reassume a proper position where we're supposed to be ruling from. And that's not going to happen in this society. It's just not. Because before this society goes down, they're going to let you know you have to worship the horn god, the mother goddess, and the divine child, aka the divine hermaphrodite. But just getting back to the point, yes, we're all supposed to be problem solvers.
Not solutions. I'm here to fix problems. My mama, girlfriend, wife, they can point them out. They come to, I'm the solution.
Absolutely.
Right. And again, my mother was a solution. Again, my parents got divorced, and my mother was about solutions. So I'm not just saying it's just a man-woman thing.
For the most part, it is a man-woman thing, though, Whitlock. But I get what you're saying. Your mother, because she loved you so much as her child, as her son, or as her daughter, many times through the maternal DNA, they start to be able to solve problems because they just want to see you happy so bad.
Everybody can be a solution solver, but we've come to this place now in our culture where we just think complaining and whining, that's what we're supposed to do.
I don't disagree with that at all. I don't disagree with that.
Well, we have to always remember at the primal level and in all cultures, all norms, all values, all beliefs, there's a choice. There's a selection. And even gender roles are choices that...
No, sir. No, gender roles are not choices. Once again, he's spewing a lot of the illuministic nonsense that he learns from the quote-unquote educated Caucasian, whether it be in the university or college system or in the psychiatric offices that he frequents. This notion that gender roles are choices. No, they're not. Gender roles are based on human anatomy and brain function. There's a reason why the man was given a larger brain. It's because he thinks on a 3-dimensional level. I'm not saying that women are dumb. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that their brain works differently. The woman's brain is configured to work in a more intimate manner than a man. The man's brain is configured to work in a more macrocosmic, or on a more macrocosmic level or perspective. How can I assist this group? That's why the man is an administrator, because he thinks, on how can I preside over this group of people, whether it be his family or as the mayor of a town or a city or the governor of a state, so on and so forth. The woman's brain does not work on that level. So that's more, quote unquote, enlightenment thinking from him, that gender roles were a choice, that, you know, ancient man and ancient woman, they just flipped the coin and said, okay, you woman, you're going to stay in the home, and me, the man, I'm going to go outside and get the food. That's not how that happened.
Are morphing as generations live.
No, gender roles are not morphing. Let me rewind this back a little bit.
Primal level, and in all cultures, all norms, all values, all beliefs, there's a choice. There's a selection, and even gender roles are choices that are morphing as generations live.
No, sir. Gender roles are not morphing. Gender roles are being socially engineered so that the woman can be the preeminent one, and the nature of the woman can trickle down to everyone else. It's nothing against Marcellus Wiley, but he's the perfect example of a highly intelligent, liberal black male. You understand? It's almost like a Jedi Knight that's on the dark side of the Force. He has certain powers, but he doesn't understand that he's being used to push and promote agendas that are going to be deleterious for our people. This concept of gender roles being a choice and how they're morphing. No, they're not morphing. It's a concerted attempt to socially engineer society, because they want the woman to be the head, because they know that she's a pawn by nature. She's someone who can be easily manipulated through her emotions, which is what the topic of this segment is about. So unfortunately, this brother doesn't get it. But as I stated at the outset, whenever I hear someone say that they've been engaged 4 times, there's something inside of him where he's looking for some type of maternal or matriarchal figure in his life that's going to have, or is going to hold huge sway over him.
Let's talk about the men. Men walk out, if they don't have a man in the home, a lot of times with a fractured spirit. So what happens when you have a fractured spirit is an insecurity. And that insecurity may take you to a physical dominance. I can't show weakness. I got to put the Teflon on. But that's the problem. And I learned this at a young age, that the bully strikes first because he's really scared to get punched. So he starts the fight because I don't really want you to bring me this fight. I start this out of pain just so that I can look like I am the more powerful one in this painful situation. Why are there so many gangbangers? Why did I grow up in a gang-infested neighborhood? It's because nobody was at home to tell them I got you all the way around, every piece of this puzzle. So when you have a 2-family dynamic, and this just happened to me this morning with my son, before I knew we were going to talk about this, I was listening to the dynamic between my son and his mother. And there was a lot of emotional energy going back and forth. And everything.
Now, brothers, did you hear that? This cat Marcellus Wiley said this morning he was listening to his son and his son's mother, a.k.a. his lady. I'm not quite sure if they're married or not, but, you know, I'll just say his lady. And he said there was a lot of emotional energy going back and forth. Why is that? It's because the woman is what? She's a child with breast disease, man. That is why. No disrespect. The woman is beautiful. She's wonderful. But overall, in general, they're a child with breast disease.
Then she said they went back and forth. And I was the bear, just letting them go back and forth. And finally, after the 4th exchange, it was like, hey. And then, you know what? Everything was resolved. But
because that's the role of the man. The man is the judge in the household.
You have to remember, when your ego is talking to you, it's irrational. When you're thinking cognitively, you're not empathetic. And when you're thinking emotionally, you're not logical. So we have to find the perfect translation of this. All of these things are going to take time. These brothers are walking out there who made it, and then their ego took them to a place where it said, I did this. That's not the same thing. So they're kind of out of text, out of zone. We'll see how they correct.
Right, but you know what? We can't wait for people to autocorrect. That's not how society works. In society, when you allow people to autocorrect, that's like saying, you know, we don't need a legislative code. We're just going to let people figure out what's right and what's wrong. That's what's called anarchy. That never works. But anyway, that's basically it on that, brothers. Once again, we cannot allow ourselves to embrace that quote-unquote self-victimhood mentality, because it's not going to change anything, and it's not going